Marcus Delroy had always been known for his steady hands. In the small town of Cedar Valley, Montana, folks would point him out to visitors as the man who could rope a calf faster than lightning and handle a wild bronco like he was born in the saddle. His hands were his livelihood, scarred from years of ranch work, but strong enough to wrestle a bull to the ground when needed. That cold October morning started like any other. Marcus arrived at the Blackwater Ranch before dawn, the steam from his coffee cup mixing with his breath in the frigid air. He had been working for Old Tom Hendricks for 12 years, ever since he graduated high school, and decided college wasn't for him. The ranch was his second home, and every horse, every fence post, every blade of grass felt familiar under his boots. The trouble began when Hendricks sold the ranch to a corporation from back east. Zenith Agricultural Holdings came in with their fancy suits and clipboards, promising to modernize everything. The new ranch manager, a sharp-faced man named Crawford, arrived with ideas about efficiency and cost-cutting that made the long-time workers nervous. Marcus was in the main barn that morning, checking on a mare that was due to foal any day. The animal had been restless all night, and he wanted to make sure everything was progressing normally. He ran his experienced hands along her sides, feeling for the position of the unborn foal. His touch was gentle but confident, the same way he had learned from his grandfather, who taught him that animals could sense fear and uncertainty in a person's hands. Crawford appeared in the doorway, flanked by two men in expensive boots who clearly had never worked a day on a ranch. They were investors, Marcus gathered from their conversation, here to see how their money was being spent. Crawford had been eager to impress them all week, pointing out every improvement and cost-saving measure he had implemented since taking over. "This is what I was telling you about," Crawford said, gesturing toward Marcus. "These old-timers think they know better than modern veterinary science. We got a vet coming out this afternoon, but this cowboy thinks he can diagnose problems just by feeling around." Marcus didn't look up from the mare, but his jaw tightened. He had successfully helped deliver hundreds of foals over the years, and this mare was showing signs that concerned him. The foal was positioned wrong, and waiting for the afternoon might be too late. "Sir," Marcus said respectfully, finally turning around. "This mare needs attention now. The foal is breached, and if we wait much longer, we might lose them both." Crawford's face flushed red. He had been working hard to establish his authority with the old crew, and having a ranch hand contradict him in front of the investors was exactly what he didn't need. "You don't make those decisions anymore, Delroy. We've got protocols now, proper procedures." The mare whinnied behind them, clearly in distress. Marcus looked back at her, then at Crawford. "With respect, sir, protocols don't mean much to a dying horse." One of the investors, a thin man with gray hair, stepped forward. "What's the concern exactly?" he asked Marcus. "The foal's position wrong, sir. Probably turned sideways. I can feel it through her belly. If we don't turn it soon, or at least get the vet out here now, we'll lose a valuable mare and her foal." Crawford's face grew darker. "These men aren't paying for your opinions, Delroy. They're here to see a modern, efficient operation." The mare's distress was becoming more obvious. She was sweating despite the cool air, and her breathing was labored. Marcus knew the signs well. He had seen enough difficult births to know when immediate action was needed. "Look," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm but firm, "I'm going to call Doc Morrison. He's delivered more foals in this county than anyone, and he can be here in 20 minutes. "You'll do no such thing," Crawford snapped. "Our contracted veterinarian will be here at 3 o'clock, and that's final." Marcus looked at his watch. It was barely 9 in the morning. 6 hours might as well be 6 days for a mare in this condition. He turned back to Crawford, and for the first time in 12 years of working at Blackwater Ranch, he directly defied a superior. "Then, I'm calling him myself," Marcus said, pulling out his cell phone. "What happened next will be talked about in Cedar Valley for years." Crawford, seeing his authority challenged in front of the investors, grabbed for Marcus's phone. In the scuffle, Marcus instinctively pulled back, but Crawford had already committed to the motion. The ranch manager's weight carried him forward, and he crashed into the tool rack mounted on the barn wall. The rat came down in a cascade of metal and wood. Hammers, wrenches, and a heavy fence post puller tumbled to the ground. Marcus jumped back to avoid the falling tools, but his right hand caught the edge of the heavy metal fence stretcher as it fell. The sound was sickening. A wet crack, followed by Marcus's sharp intake of breath. He looked down to see his hand trapped beneath the 40-pound tool, his index and middle fingers bent at angles that defied nature. Blood began seeping from beneath the metal. Crawford stood frozen, his face pale. The investors looked horrified. The mare continued her labored breathing in the background, but all attention was now focused on Marcus's mangled hand. Marcus gritted his teeth and lifted the tool off his hand with his left arm. His right hand hung useless at his side, 2 fingers clearly broken, possibly shattered. But instead of crying out or cursing, he looked directly at Crawford. "Now you better call that vet," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the obvious pain. "Because I can't help this mare anymore." The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency room visits and paperwork. Marcus's hand required surgery to reset the bones in his fingers, and the doctor warned him that he might never have full use of those fingers again. For a man whose livelihood depended on his hands, it was devastating news. But what bothered Marcus more than his injury was what had happened to the mare. By the time the contracted veterinarian arrived that afternoon, it was too late. The foal had died in the womb, and the mare barely survived the emergency surgery to remove it. A $5,000 horse, and her potentially valuable offspring had been lost because of Crawford's stubborn pride. Word spread quickly through Cedar Valley about what had happened at Blackwater Ranch. The other ranch hands whispered about how Crawford had caused Marcus's injury, and then cost the ranch a valuable animal through his inexperience. The investors, meanwhile, were asking hard questions about Crawford's judgment and management style. Marcus spent 3 days in the hospital and another week at home, trying to regain movement in his damaged fingers. The doctor had been honest with him. He would likely never have the same dexterity in his right hand again. Simple tasks like buttoning a shirt or tying a knot were now challenging and painful. But Marcus wasn't ready to give up. Every morning, he worked his fingers through painful exercises, squeezing a tennis ball and practicing picking up small objects. His grandfather had always told him that a man's worth wasn't measured by his circumstances, but by how he responded to them. On a Friday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the accident, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. It was one of the investors from Zenith Agricultural Holdings, the gray-haired man who had asked about the mare that day. "Mr. Delroy," the man said, "my name is Richard Steinberg. I was there the day you were injured. I wanted to talk to you about something." Marcus listened as Steinberg explained that Crawford had been fired the previous day. The investors had lost confidence in his judgment, particularly after the incident with the mare. But more importantly, they were looking for someone with real experience to manage the ranch properly. "We've heard about your reputation around Cedar Valley," Steinberg said. 12 years at Blackwater, grew up on ranches, know the business inside and out. "We'd like to offer you Crawford's job." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had destroyed his hand was now being replaced by him. But there was one problem. "Mr. Steinberg," Marcus said finally, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I can do the job anymore. My hand." He flexed his damaged fingers, feeling the familiar ache. "That's exactly why we want you," Steinberg replied. A man who would risk his career to save an animal, who kept his composure when he was injured, and who still tried to do right by that mare, even after he was hurt. That's the kind of character we need running this operation. Marcus thought about it over the weekend. The job would mean better pay, more responsibility, and a chance to implement the kind of thoughtful, animal-first practices he believed in. But it would also mean proving himself all over again, this time with a permanent disability. On Monday morning, he called Steinberg back and accepted the job. His first day as ranch manager was set for the following week, and Marcus knew it would be a test unlike any he had faced before. The other ranch hands would be watching to see if their injured colleague could really handle the responsibility. Some would be supportive, others doubtful. But Marcus had one advantage that Crawford had never possessed: the respect of the men who actually worked the land. They had seen him injured in defense of an animal, and they knew he understood the real business of ranching in a way that no corporate manager ever could. As he prepared for his new role, Marcus practiced his rope work every evening behind his small house on the edge of town. His right hand was clumsy and painful, but his determination was stronger than ever. He knew that his first real test would come soon, and when it did, he intended to be ready. Marcus's first week as ranch manager tested every assumption people had about his ability to lead with an injured hand. The morning he officially took over, he arrived at Blackwater Ranch to find the crew assembled near the main barn, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. These were men he had worked alongside for years, but now the dynamic had completely changed. Jake Morrison, a weathered cowboy in his 50s, was the first to speak up. "Hell, Marcus, good to see you back. Heard about the promotion." There was warmth in his voice, but also a question lurking beneath. Everyone knew about the hand, and everyone wondered how it would affect his ability to do the job. The first real test came on Wednesday. A shipment of cattle had arrived from Texas, and the animals needed to be sorted, vaccinated, and assigned to different pastures based on their age and breeding status. It was exactly the kind of hands-on work that required quick reflexes and sure handling. Marcus watched as the cattle milled nervously in the holding pen, their eyes wide with stress from the long journey. Young bulls snorted and pawed the ground while cows pressed against the fence panels, looking for escape routes. This was dangerous work, even for an experienced cowboy with two good hands. "Boss," said Tommy Chun, one of the younger hands, "maybe you should supervise from outside the pen. We've got this handled." It was said with respect, but Marcus caught the underlying message. The crew was protecting him, treating him like an invalid who couldn't handle the real work anymore. If he accepted their help now, he would never truly lead this ranch. "Appreciate the concern, Tommy," Marcus said, adjusting his gloves carefully over his damaged fingers, "but I didn't take this job to watch from the sidelines." He climbed the fence and dropped into the pen with the cattle. His right hand throbbed immediately as he gripped his rope, but he forced himself to ignore the pain. The bulls turned to face him, their attention focused and potentially hostile. The largest bull, a massive Angus with scars across his shoulders from old fights, stepped forward with clear aggressive intent. Marcus had dealt with challenging bulls before, but always with complete confidence in his rope work. Now, with compromised grip strength in his dominant hand, everything was different. The bull charged. Marcus's rope sang through the air, his left hand guiding while his injured right hand fought to maintain tension. The loop settled around the bull's neck, but the animal's momentum nearly yanked the rope from his damaged grip. Pain shot up his arm as his broken fingers screamed in protest. But the rope held. Marcus dug his heels in and used his body weight to control the bull's forward motion, steering the animal toward the sorting gate. The other cattle, seeing their leader controlled, began to calm down. Jake Morrison hooped from the fence. "Still got it, boss." But Marcus knew how close it had been. His hand was on fire, and he could feel his grip strength fading with each passing minute. He needed to finish this job quickly before his injury betrayed him completely. The sorting went smoothly after that. The crew, seeing that their new manager wasn't going to hide behind his disability, fell into their familiar rhythm. Cattle flowed through the chutes, vaccinations were administered, and assignments were made based on Marcus's experienced eye for evaluating livestock. By late afternoon, however, word had spread beyond the ranch about the new manager's first week. Cedar Valley was a small town where news traveled fast, and people were taking sides about whether Marcus could really handle the job. The criticism reached its peak on Friday evening at Murphy's Tavern, the local gathering spot where ranchers and farm workers unwound after long days. Marcus wasn't there, but several Blackwater hands were, and they heard every word of the conversation happening at the bar. Bill Carver, who managed the competing Rocking Our Ranch, was holding court with a beer in his hand and skepticism in his voice. Don't get me wrong, I feel for Marcus about what happened to his hand. That was a raw deal. But running a ranch isn't about good intentions. It's about getting results. Several men nodded in agreement. Carver had a reputation as a successful manager, even if his methods were sometimes harsh. You can't rope properly with a busted hand, Carver continued. You can't handle heavy equipment the same way. And when you're dealing with dangerous animals or emergency situations, hesitation kills. I heard he nearly got trampled by that Angus bull this week. Tommy Chun, who had witnessed the incident, started to speak up in Marcus's defense, but Carver cut him off. Look, I respect what the man tried to do for that mare. Crawford was a fool, and everyone knows it. But sentiment doesn't run a ranch. Zenith made a mistake promoting him, and everyone in this valley is going to see it before long. The conversation might have ended there, but Jake Morrison had been listening from a corner booth, and Jake had known Marcus since they were both young men starting out in the ranch business. Bill, Jake said, standing up slowly, you're talking about something you don't understand. The tavern grew quiet. Jake Morrison rarely spoke up in groups, but when he did, people listened. I've worked with a lot of men over the years, Jake continued, and I can tell you that hands are important, but heart is more important. Marcus has got more heart for this business than any 3 managers you could name. Carver snorted. Heart doesn't brand cattle, Jake. Heart doesn't fix broken fences or negotiate with buyers. No, Jake agreed, but it makes decisions that save lives and money. Crawford had 2 good hands, and look what that got us. A dead foal, an injured worker, and a mare that nearly died because he was too proud to listen to experience. The argument was building toward something larger when Murphy himself, the tavern owner, stepped between the 2 groups. Let's keep this friendly, boys. No need to settle ranch business in my place. But the damage was done. Word of the confrontation spread back to Marcus by Saturday morning. He learned that his ability to lead was being questioned publicly, and that some people in the community were openly betting on how long it would take for Zenith to replace him. Marcus spent Saturday morning working alone in the main barn, checking equipment and trying to process his frustration. His hand ached constantly now, a reminder of his limitations every time he tried to grip a tool or lift something heavy. That's when he heard the vehicles approaching. 3 trucks pulled up to the main building, and Marcus recognized the lead vehicle as belonging to Clayton Brewster, the regional manager from Zenith Agricultural Holdings. Brewster had flown in from Denver specifically to check on the ranch's progress under its new management. Marcus walked out to meet them, wiping his hands on a rag. Brewster was a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested he had made hard decisions for most of his adult life. He was accompanied by 2 assistants and, surprisingly, Bill Carver. Marcus, Brewster said with a firm handshake that made Marcus wince as pressure hit his damaged fingers. Good to see you on your feet. I understand you've had quite a week. Yes, sir, Marcus replied carefully, getting settled into the new responsibilities. That's what I wanted to talk about, Brewster said. I've been hearing some concerns from the local ranching community about whether this arrangement is working out. Marcus glanced at Carver, who was studying his boots with obvious discomfort. It was clear that someone had been talking to Zenith about Marcus's performance. What kind of concerns? Marcus asked. Brewster gestured toward the holding pens where the cattle from Texas were grazing peacefully. I understand there was an incident with some bulls this week. Some people are worried that your injury might be affecting your ability to handle the more demanding aspects of ranch management. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus realized this was more than just a check-in visit. This was an evaluation, possibly a prelude to his dismissal. Brewster was giving him a chance to resign gracefully before more serious problems developed. Marcus looked at the cattle, then at his bandaged right hand, then back at Brewster. Sir, I won't lie to you. The injury has changed some things about how I work. But it hasn't changed what I know about ranching or my commitment to doing this job right. That's admirable, Brewster said, but commitment isn't always enough. We've got a significant investment in this operation, and we need management that can handle any situation that comes up. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the far pasture. One of the ranch hands, Tommy Chun, was riding hard toward them, his horse lathered with sweat. He pulled up sharply and addressed Marcus directly. "Boss, we've got trouble in the north section. That creek that runs along the boundary with the Morrison property has flooded, and about 30 head of our cattle are trapped on a small rise. Water's rising fast with all this snow melt, and if we don't get them out soon, they're going to be cut off completely." Brewster looked at Marcus with obvious interest. This was exactly the kind of emergency situation that would test whether the new ranch manager could handle crisis management with his disability. "How bad is the flooding?" Marcus asked Tommy. "Bad enough that we can't get vehicles close. It's going to have to be horseback work and probably rope work to guide the cattle to higher ground. The footing is treacherous, and some of those animals are already spooked." Marcus felt all eyes on him. This was the moment that would define his tenure as ranch manager. He could delegate the dangerous work to others and coordinate from a safe distance, which would be the smart thing to do given his limitations. Or he could lead from the front and risk exposing his weakness in front of Brewster and Carver. But as he thought about those 30 head of cattle standing on diminishing ground while flood water rose around them, there was really only one choice he could make. "Tommy, get 3 more riders and have them meet me at the north gate in 10 minutes. Make sure everyone has rope and emergency gear." He turned to Brewster. "Sir, I need to handle this situation. If you want to follow us out there and see how we operate, you're welcome to do so." Brewster nodded slowly. "I think that would be very educational." Marcus was already walking toward the barn to get his horse, his mind focused on the challenges ahead. The injured hand that had been a source of doubt and limitation was about to be tested in the most demanding way possible. The ride to the north section took 20 minutes through muddy terrain that grew worse with every step. Marcus led the group on Thunder, his reliable quarter horse, while Brewster and Carver followed in a ranch utility vehicle that struggled through the increasingly boggy ground. Behind them came Tommy Chun and 3 other experienced hands, all mounted and carrying coiled ropes. When they crested the hill overlooking the flooded creek, the situation was even worse than Tommy had described. What was normally a gentle stream had become a raging torrent of muddy water, swollen by 3 days of warm weather that had melted the mountain snowpack faster than the ground could absorb it. In the middle of the flood zone, a small island of higher ground held 30 head of cattle that were clearly in distress. The water had risen high enough that the cattle were pressed together on maybe half an acre of muddy ground. Some of the younger animals were already showing signs of panic, moving restlessly and lowing in fear. The water continued to rise visibly, eating away at the edges of their temporary refuge. "Jesus," muttered Jake Morrison, who had caught up with the group. "That water's moving fast. Must be 3 feet deep in most places." Brewster climbed out of the vehicle and studied the scene through binoculars. "How do you propose to get them out?" he asked Marcus. Marcus was already analyzing the situation, his experience on measuring distances, water depth, and possible routes to safety. The cattle were about 200 yards from solid ground, but the current was strong enough to sweep away an animal that lost its footing. "We'll need to string a rope line across the flood zone," Marcus said, thinking aloud. "Anchor it on both sides so the cattle have something to follow. Then we ride out there and guide them back along the rope, keeping them moving even if they panic." Tommy Chun looked skeptical. "Boss, that water's moving awful fast. If a horse goes down out there, both horse and rider could be in real trouble. And if we don't get those cattle out," Marcus replied, "we'll lose them all. That's close to $40,000 worth of livestock." Carver, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke up. "This is exactly what I was talking about at Murphy's," he said to Brewster. "This kind of work requires perfect coordination between horse and rider. A man can't afford to have his rope work compromised when lives are at stake." Marcus felt the weight of every eye on him. This was the moment that would determine not just the fate of the trapped cattle, but his entire future as ranch manager. He could delegate the dangerous work to his men and coordinate from the bank, which would be the safe choice. But it would also confirm every doubt that had been raised about his ability to lead when the work got tough. He dismounted and began checking Thunder's tack, making sure every buckle and strap was secure. His damaged hand made the process slower than usual, but he forced himself to be thorough. "Jake," he said, "I want you and Tommy to anchor the guide rope on this side. Make sure it's tied off to that big cottonwood. Billy, you take the other end and work your way around to the far side of the flood zone. Don't try to cross the deep water. Go the long way around." The men began moving immediately, but Carver stepped forward. "Marcus, be reasonable about this. Send someone else out there. You've got nothing to prove." Marcus paused in checking his cinch. "Bill, I appreciate your concern, but those are my cattle on my ranch, and it's my responsibility to get them out. Your injured hand could get you killed out there."